Do I have now control? No. How do I get?
There we do. Now we do.
Now
Okay.
I do?
You
Okay.
can do this.
Oh, I think I'm just going to do this.
Okay.
Keep it old school.
Yep.
Good morning. I'll give everyone a moment to take their seats. Okay, good morning. Welcome to the West Virginia Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Conference 2024. I'm so happy to be in Huntington. We kicked off Bridging Innovation Week yesterday. We were at the I3 pitch competition in Charleston. Dr. Alan Letton did a great Building Black Business in West Virginia right here, and we had a great time at that. And thank you, Tricia Ball, who hosted the Chamber After Hours at the Brad D. Smith Schools of Business. So we're already off to a strong start. We're very excited today to have you all here. We have a very engaging lots of engaging conversations today and a tight schedule, so I am going to be brief and say, Amber Ravenscroft, please welcome to the stage.
Hi, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Amber Ravenscroft. I'm the Director of Innovation for the Adventure Group, and Tara, second half co-chair of the West Virginia Entrepreneurship Ecosystem. We are so honored to be here today. I just want to give a quick recognition to our diamond level sponsors. This would not be possible without you. That includes the West Virginia Department of Economic Development, including the SBDC and Business Link, Right to Start, an amazing group that we've been privileged to work with this year, the Appalachian Regional Commission, and the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, who is one of our catalytic funders at the very beginning of this effort. So just give them a quick round of applause. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome Mike Graney to the stage for a few opening remarks, and then we're going to get kicked started with our first fireside chat.
Thanks, Amber. Wow. This is awesome. This is really awesome. Congratulations to all who curated this event, and congrats to you all for attending this event. You know, after 5.5 years in this role as, in economic development, I still consider myself a recovering entrepreneur, right? And, if you have a great idea, you have passion, you're willing to work really hard, you're willing to shove it all in and take a lot of risk, you can be an entrepreneur too. Fire in the belly is really required, but you have to be careful what you wish for. You want to own a business. Actually, it'll end up owning you, but that's okay, right? You get to achieve something. You get to feel really good about what you're doing. So, Amber, Tara, great job on setting this up. Well done. Steve Johnson, Mark Burdett, all the SBDC coaches who are here, congratulations for being here and supporting this effort. So I encourage you all to network, swap great ideas, and have some fun over the next few days, because this is how we're going to grow our economy in West Virginia. There are 120,000 businesses or something like that. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, something like that. 150,000, thank you very much, 98 of which are considered small business. So this is how we make the economy work here in West Virginia and the nation and the world for that matter. So thanks for having me. Have a great time. I'll see you later.
Thanks, Mike. We appreciate your continued support. All right, so it is my honor to bring to the stage Victor Wang and Brad from Canova.
That's the best introduction I could hope for. Go ahead and have a seat, Victor. I'm going to do a brief introduction of Victor. We're going to do a fireside chat, and then after that, we're going to open it up for a few questions from the audience. But let me start with Victor. His visionary approach to economic development sets him apart. I'm speaking third person here, so I'm going to look at you and say, set you apart. How's that? He reimagines what it takes to create positive economic change in communities, in states, and quite frankly, in nations. His role as founder, leader, and advisor has driven initiatives that ignite and sustain innovation, creates an entrepreneurial spirit worldwide, and makes him a standout figure in the entrepreneurial community. His clients include the World Bank, Ford Foundation, Inter-American Development Bank, and the U.S. Agency for International Development. And then corporate clients include IBM, Accenture, and Microsoft, just to name a few. Victor is the founder and CEO of Victor & Company. That's pretty original. As well as Right to Start. And Right to Start amplifies the voices of entrepreneurs. It mobilizes grassroots efforts, encourages policymakers to create a more inclusive entrepreneurial landscape. Your work transcends traditional boundaries, and you have set the standard for entrepreneurial leadership. It is my pleasure to invite to the stage and ask you to give another warm welcome to my dear friend, many, many years, Victor Wayne.
Thank you, Brad. Or you can just call me Victor from Baton Rouge.
That's why I love you, buddy. Victor from Baton Rouge. You know, last night we were having a conversation up in Charleston, and someone was from West Virginia and someone was from your part of the country, and they introduced themselves as cornbread and gumbo. So I guess that's what we're going to be. How's that?
Could be.
I'm cornbread.
And I was born in Baton Rouge and actually lived all up and down the middle of the country. So I'm kind of a product of Middle America in many ways.
That's fantastic. Well, welcome back to the Great Mountain State. Clearly, you have been engaged in entrepreneurial activity for many years. Not to age you, I just celebrated my 60th birthday on Saturday, so you're much younger than me. Well, thank you for that. It's a number that I wasn't looking forward to, and I still don't like to say out loud, but you can tell I'm like confessing. I'm Brad, and I'm 60. But just as you think about today's landscape, would you consider it to be harder or easier to be an entrepreneur than it was perhaps a decade ago?
Well, the answer is, I was trained as a lawyer, so the answer is yes and no. And it's yes in the sense that the tools to start a business are actually easier than ever. Like you could actually wake up, roll out of bed in your bathrobe, and you could go online and all the tools to start a business, from formation to finding capital to finding designers for prototyping, for finding supply chains, for marketing, for customers. You could do that all from your phone today. It's like the tools are amazing, yet the no part is our economic and governance systems and cultural systems are actually last centuries. And so in many ways, there are all these forces that actually push against you in starting a business. Even though all the digital tools are there, the economic, government, and systemic and cultural tools are not. And so you can actually see this come out in the data. So a lot of people are shocked when they find out that there's been this boom in entrepreneurship since COVID, but if you look since they started tracking the data in the late 70s, the overall rate of decline in entrepreneurship in America has been precipitous. It fell to right before COVID almost half of what it was in the late 70s. And that also comes out in the data in terms of how people feel in terms of workforce mobility. So about half the population now works in small businesses than did in the 70s as well. So there's been overall kind of fewer and fewer people involved in entrepreneurship as a whole over the last several decades in this country.
Well, that's eye-opening, because still the statistics suggest that about half of all Americans work in a small business, and about 80% of all new jobs are created by startups. So the fact that those two things are declining does not speak positively to the outlook unless we're able to reverse this entrepreneurial trend.
That's right, and there's another statistic that's really important to know, which is that in terms of where the net new job growth comes from in the economy as a whole, almost all of it, well over 90% of it, comes from young businesses under 5 years. And so when you look at, if you compare it to older businesses over 5 years and over 10 years, businesses 5 to 10 years old are kind of net neutral in the economy. Businesses 10 years or older actually are net negative jobs in the economy. So big businesses, as they get older, tend to shed jobs. They get leaner, they get more efficient as they're supposed to. And they actually don't increase new jobs. It's actually the innovation that new businesses create that drives almost all the job growth in the economy.
That's inspiring. So let me shift to West Virginia's unique economic landscape. As you look at us as a state, compare us to what you've seen elsewhere, what are the unique opportunities or potential challenges you think face an entrepreneur in West Virginia?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the strengths of this place, and you all know this, it's the warmth of the people and the beauty of the place. Which I love when you drive into the state, you get the signs that say "Almost Heaven," and it really does strike you. It's such a beautiful place, and the warmth of the people. There's a way of communicating here. I noticed Tara hugged everybody coming on and off stage, except for me, but it's all right. I won't. Yeah. But it's a unique warmth of this place, and if you think about the fact that we're in a remote economy now, where people can work anywhere and they can do stuff anywhere, and you have people moving jobs. People doing great work anywhere in the country or the world, and they can live anywhere they want to live. You can actually fight for people to be where you want them to be. And so there's a phrase a friend of mine came up with. He said, people are the new companies. Where we used to fight for companies in the past, we should be fighting for people. And people, if you get the right people in a place, they can do anything. They can create stuff. They can innovate. They can energize a community. And there's a chance now to fight for people with the resources that are here.
You know, this is going to be a shameless plug now, but this is why the state, with a coalition of others, launched Ascend West Virginia several years ago, because we said if we can retain our best and brightest and attract those who want to come and live in a community where God's kindest angels reside, then companies will follow talent. And so people are the new business. And if we can actually have these incredibly talented people here coming out of our universities and high schools and then bring those remote workers who want to live here, then the companies will follow. And so far, that hypothesis is playing out, which is pretty exciting. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, you can see this kind of transformation in places like Tulsa, which kind of was one of the first places to come up with this remote program. They weren't the first. They actually borrowed the idea from Chile, which had the Startup Chile program. And they found in Chile, they gave money to people to come to Chile and start businesses. And they found that the biggest effect was not the businesses, it was the transformation by bringing the people in who created global networks. Suddenly, Chile was able to tap into networks of people and talent and culture that they'd never been able to get before. But it energized the community, bringing in fresh blood. And just that idea of bringing in fresh blood, new ideas, new ways of doing business has a catalytic effect. And I've seen it in Tulsa now. On the street in Tulsa, a decade ago, Tulsa was not on the map. And now when you're there, people walk differently, they talk differently. It's a different feel in that place. And the remote program had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and we're excited. We're up to 367 people now. We're going to be bringing in 1,000 over the next couple years. In 5 different communities, we have a 96.5% retention rate. So they're actually coming, falling in love with West Virginia, and staying. And we're starting to see the same thing. In fact, 7 babies have been born to the Ascenders. So we're reversing population decline, 7 at a time. So let me shift the policy for a minute. You've done amazing work with Right to Start. And as you think about policies, what policies are crucial to West Virginia, or maybe more specifically in those underserved communities that haven't historically had the support they need?
The thing about entrepreneurship policy is this, which is if you look across, I've been doing this work now for well over 2 decades in entrepreneurship development, and entrepreneurship policy tends to be a lot of point solutions, which is they'll say, well, if we could just build this incubator or this accelerator program, or we could just run this training program, or we could just build this single fund, that will make all the difference. And the problem is entrepreneurship is not a point solution problem. It's a 360-degree problem. It's an ecosystem problem. And so that idea of ecosystems is important. And we talk a lot about that word, but what it really means is it's a 360-degree issue, which is everything affects entrepreneurship. So when you think about policy making, almost every aspect of policy making affects entrepreneurs, from education, cutting red tape, capital formation, economic development, workforce training, government contracts, healthcare, childcare, on and on. Everything affects entrepreneurship, which means you can't just tackle it one point solution at a time. So the approach we've been taking at Right to Start, and we found a lot of traction in this, which is start by putting someone in charge of the voice of the entrepreneur in the system itself. Because you can't point solution your way out of this, but you can get the voice of the entrepreneur in the system and start to let the system respond to it. And so now we've got 3 states that Right to Start has taken an active role in helping support the creation of offices of entrepreneurship. And this is in Nevada, New Mexico, and Kansas, where they have an office of entrepreneurship. And we've had cities now developing one-stop shops, which become like embedded offices of entrepreneurship in the city level. And what happens is when you get an office of entrepreneurship now, like in Nevada, the actual law that was passed in Nevada by the legislature and signed by the governor says we're going to create an office of entrepreneurship. They're going to be in charge of tracking data on entrepreneurs. They're going to provide recommendations on cutting red tape for entrepreneurs. They're going to open up government contracts for entrepreneurs. They are effectively going to be the voice to coordinate all aspects of policymaking for the person trying to start and build new enterprises. And so that becomes a systems level change that can actually start to get leverage on this problem.
You know, I love that. There's an analog to that in business. Everyone's read this case study. Amazon is famous for having an empty seat in their boardroom, and every time there's a decision being made that's being debated, Jeff Bezos would famously turn to the empty seat, which represented the customer, and say, what would she say? And ultimately, no one in the room would have the answer, and he said, let's go figure that out. So they would go back to the customer would break all ties. To have the Office of Entrepreneurship right there in the state, helping think about what does the entrepreneur need, is a wonderful way to keep everybody centered on the lifeblood of a state's economy.
I love that idea. Like what is the customer? We know what the customer of a company is, like Amazon, it's the buyer of the product. What's the customer of the economy? And if you think of the way we've designed our economies, the primary customer of our economies for the last half century has been large established corporations, which are important. They're absolutely critical, and you need to support your companies so they can be successful. But we also need to have our customers as the entrepreneurs, because they're the people that are creating new stuff. And we haven't really thought like that in this country for a long time now.
I love that. It's a wonderful inspiration. Well, you mentioned the ecosystem, lots of different stakeholders in an entrepreneurial ecosystem. One of them are investors. What strategies would you recommend to West Virginia that would help bring either national or international investment to our entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Well, I've talked about the problem of point solutions in entrepreneurship policy. And so you can't point solution your way out of the capital formation problem. We actually did a poll at Right to Start, and we asked American voters, as bipartisan poll with 2 of the top pollsters in the country, what gets in the way of starting a business? We found that almost half of Americans have wanted to start a business, and of those, half of them don't start a business. And the top reason is lack of capital access. Half of them say it's red tape, half of them say it's healthcare. So there's a lot of reasons, it's multifaceted, but capital access is a big reason. And you can't point solution your way out of this, and so what I suggest is this, which is to be incredibly bold in how you think about capital formation, which very few places do, because they'll try to copy other states and say, we'd like to do this fund, or we'd like to do this, create an angel network. Those are all great, important, critical pieces of it, but think bold. And I'll give you one example of what's happening right now in Ohio. You may or may not be familiar with it. The Ohio Fund is being started now. It's about to be launched by Mark Kwame and Ray Leach. Mark Kwame is a legend in the capital world. He actually left Sequoia, which is arguably the top venture capital firm in American history. And he left Sequoia to go to Ohio at the invitation of Governor Kasich. And he ran economic development for a while, transformed economic development, but now they're launching the Ohio Fund, which is modeled off of Singapore's Temasek, which you may or may not have heard of. Temasek is the state-sponsored investment fund of Singapore, and it is huge. It touches every aspect of Singaporean life. It invests in all forms of startup companies, large corporations, real estate, and it also builds new funds. So it does fund-to-funds development. So this Ohio Fund that Mark and Ray are starting is actually all the above. It's going to invest in startups, big companies, real estate, and it's going to dedicate 10 to 15% into fund-to-funds development, which is sparking new fund formation throughout the whole state. And they're about to close on the first of several $100 million in this new fund, and it's going to be evergreen. So the reason Temasek is so amazing is because it's an evergreen fund that the government set up, which means all the profits flow right back into investing, which just grows and grows and grows if you do it well. And so that kind of big, crazy thinking has not happened in this country in capital formation in a very, very long time. And if you think about like some of the big tools of capital formation in this country, like the SBIC, people talk about that sometimes. Some of you may not know it, but Small Business Investment Company started in the 50s, 60s in the United States. At the time, it was created to spark new capital formation in markets that didn't have capital. Over time, it evolved into subsidizing private equity firms to launch new private equity firms. it lost its track. And we need to get back in that business again of how do you spark a network and ecosystem of capital in a place.
Wow, I love it. You know, you mentioned Singapore, and you and I have spoken about this in prior years. There's a wonderful book about the formation of Singapore and how they went about going from a third world country to a first world country in record time. No other country's ever achieved it. And they literally did it through intellectual curiosity, sent their best and brightest to all the different countries around the world to learn from London, to learn from New York, to learn from Silicon Valley, and came back and brought those best practices. The reason why I bring that out is because there's so many lessons, as you suggested, that we've been able to borrow from them. Last week, I was on the phone with the CEO of LinkedIn, who serves on the board of Intuit, which I served for 20 years. And we were talking about how can we have a platform that connects our talent to the jobs in our state. And he said, the challenge you have is not unique. They discovered the same thing in Singapore is their companies do not know how to post a job profile on LinkedIn appropriately, and their students are not actually listing the right skills. And so now we've actually worked with them. They're training the business owners how to post a job posting on LinkedIn, and they're making it a requirement that every person in Singapore has to have a profile on LinkedIn. And they're literally creating this matching talent with jobs. And I thought, whoa, what an amazing opportunity. So we're coming back and talking to the Secretary of Commerce here about can we do something like that in West Virginia, which is pretty interesting.
Cool. Now, I've got a request. Next time you talk to the CEO of LinkedIn, here's an idea, which LinkedIn does not have. They don't have a boomerang button, which is to look for people that are part of the diaspora of a place. And so when you're recruiting for talent in a place like West Virginia, so much of the power is finding boomerangs like this guy, who have a connection to this place that actually would love to come back if someone reached out and said, why don't you come back here? And I know this is an issue because on LinkedIn, it actually takes a lot of work to figure out, well, does this person have a tie to a place? When we lived in Kansas City, and I was at the Kauffman Foundation, we would try to recruit people to Kansas City to do, and I wanted to do, you know, nation-changing work at the Kauffman Foundation. And the recruiter said, it's really hard to figure out who actually has a tie to Kansas City. And I thought, well, there's no button on LinkedIn to do that? And they said no. And it's like, well, I mean, there should be a button, right? So there should be a boomerang button on LinkedIn.
I love the boomerang button. It's fantastic. Put the bat signal in the sky, return home.
Put the bat signal in the sky.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a related idea to the boomerang button. I mentioned Ascend West Virginia earlier. West Virginia has a lot of amazing assets. Many times people don't fully appreciate. We have the second greatest density of whitewater rapids, second only to Australia, not Colorado. We have the highest peak east of Wyoming in terms of rock climbing. We have beautiful natural resources. We have the newest national park. How can we leverage those sorts of assets and these amazing people to attract more people here to help build the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
You know, this place is, and you have a new national park as well,
Yes,
right?
we do, yeah.
You know, the way, when you talk about it, you know, I get chills hearing about it, but people don't know that. And I think there's a chance to create a mythology about the place that doesn't exist in the American mind right now. So it's a bit of storytelling and creative, like narrative writing about mythology of what is this place? What does almost heaven look like? And if you think about how certain places get identified with certain things, so now like Sundance, right, Park City, Utah, Davos, right, Davos, Switzerland, even like, you know, you look at like the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, which only a few people really know about, but everybody in the healthcare industry knows the first week of January in downtown San Francisco is the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. And it's a place you go, South by Southwest in Austin. How do you create a sense of place and identity and mythology around, this is a beautiful place, but it's also a place where stuff happens. And I think thinking really bold around what that looks like. I don't know the exact answer, but I do know place, love of place, mythology of a place is really important now in economic development. And you can have a transformative effect by making a place truly stand out and speak in a way to a national audience that actually is hungering for real analog connectivity again in a digital world. So that's sort of one idea is how do you get to that point where someone says, like, when someone says Davos, Switzerland, you immediately think World Economic Forum. And you think, well, that's where world leaders go to make decisions. When you think of Sun Valley now, like Allen and Company has a big annual conference out there. And you think, people in that, I don't get invited to that conference, but people know that's where you go to like do like big types of media thinking, you know, digital thinking. And so what is it about this place that can become something like that?
I love it, and we often say we allowed John Denver to be our marketing engine for way too long. God bless him, because anywhere you go in the world, everyone can sing the song. And now 81% of those surveyed want to live in a rural community. So rural is the new urban, and we have the opportunity to go out and capitalize on that and tell the story. At this point, we're going to open it up. Are you okay? I'd like to see
Sure.
if the audience has questions for you. I've got another half a dozen just in case, but I really want to make sure that we get questions that may be on your mind. Does anybody have a question for Victor?
Hey, Victor, I know you've done a lot of work nationally with lowering the barriers to entry for entrepreneurs. If you could pick the one or two top things that you could look at and see what barriers we need to remove to help people get in, what would you say those are?
The question is, what if you had to pick one or two barriers to try to break down to help people to break into entrepreneurship? Well, I'll tell you what the data says, and then I'll tell you what I think the real answer is. The data says capital's number one, then red tape, fees and forms, lack of access to health care because people are scared of starting a business because they're not sure about their health care. And then you get into non-compete agreements, you get into fear. Fear is actually a huge thing, which is pervasive. So it's sort of a lot of things. And so the question, the answer that we found at Right to Start is the best, is actually where's the political energy of a community go to? What is doable? Rather than trying to force something to happen that the community doesn't want to do, when you talk to people in the community, what do they think they want to do? And run with that energy. And it's you go with the goers. You go where that energy is. If people want to cut red tape, if there's that political energy, like we just got to cut red tape, go with that. If they want to build capital, run with that. And I think you'll find much more success that way. So with Right to Start, these bills we've been able to help support are called Right to Start Acts. And they all have at the core of just get someone in charge of the issue. Because right now, if you look, in the United States now, in the United States government, there's no one in charge of entrepreneurship. It's actually spread out across like 20 different agencies. It's not just SBA. Everyone thinks it's SBA, but it's Treasury, NSF, NIH, DOD, OMB. Everyone's responsible, which means no one's responsible. And so put someone in charge of it, and then they can start to figure out where does the community want to go. And I think listening to community, being highly responsive to it, it's design thinking. Like the kind of stuff that has happened here around design thinking, I've actually talked across the country about it. It's catalytic because we're shifting. Education's another place to start as well. Everyone wants to do something there. And it's not about how do you create more things for kids to learn. It's how do you take the things they're already learning and make entrepreneurial thinking embedded throughout all of it. And that becomes something that is just imprinted on the ways they think, as opposed to trying to force yet another credential, yet another hour of school onto kids. It's how do you take the math and the history and the English to make them all about entrepreneurial styles of thinking.
I want to insert something here and give everybody a chance to think about the next question. There were 2 points you brought up. One, you went through that list of barriers, and you talked about fear. And I often get asked, Brett, what is the biggest difference from what you experienced when you were in Silicon Valley for 20 years and what you experience here? I said the answer was one word. Out there, if someone said, hey, start a business, they would say, why not? Here, we say, start a business. And the question is, why? And it's this notion of, do I have what it takes? Do I have the right concept? Can I do it? Which introduces the second point, which is design thinking. The reason why that has become pervasive to say why not is because Stanford developed something called the Stanford D School, Design School. We at Intuit and everyone else borrowed those techniques and infused them in our culture. It's called design thinking. It teaches you to do 3 things. Fall in love with the problem, not an idea. You don't have to have an idea. You have to figure out what is the problem in my life that I want to solve that no one has solved, and go really deep to understand what is the root cause of that problem. Then the second is go broad to go narrow. Come up with at least 7 different ways you can solve that problem. You actually want to get more than 7. Stanford suggests you don't get to real breakthrough until about 17 or 18. But try to come up with at least 7 different ideas that could solve that problem. That's the second, go broad to go narrow. And then the third is run rapid, low-cost experiments to figure out which of those 7 is the most promising, and that's the one you double down on. Why is that important? Because now that's called Design for Delight. We've brought it to the university. We've trained our Board of Governors, we've trained the Cabinet, we've trained our deans, our department chairs, and now all first-year freshmen are getting a 6-week course in design thinking. And the new business school on 4th Avenue here in Huntington, we actually have an I-Center, incubator, an innovation center. You can come in and we will work with anyone in the community to teach them design thinking. So hopefully this is going to become much more pervasive so all of us can stop saying why and start saying why not? We can figure it out.
I spent a decade in Silicon Valley, and like Brad was saying, when you finally get there, it took me just a while, but within after a year or two, you realize it's not the tech, it's not the capital, it's not all the stuff that you hear about in the news. It's they think differently there. People, it's like something's in the air. People behave differently, and you realize, the majority of people in Silicon Valley are from elsewhere. They just come there and change the way they act. It's not like there's some magic thing. And so if you can take that way of thinking and you can move it anywhere. What's great about design thinking is they actually put it in a bottle. So this is the folks at IDEO, and they said, what do we call this thing that sort of embedded this Silicon Valley way of asking, well, why not? And they put it into a bottle and they called it design thinking. And so what you've done here in West Virginia by saying we're going to take design thinking and we're just going to open up that bottle and unleash it on a place is catalytic, because it means that you can take what's already here and just change it. You can make it into its own Silicon Valley with really no money down. I mean, that's what's so crazy about it, right? You don't need $1 billion to do it. You just change the way people who are already here are thinking, and it has a viral effect. It spreads because people start to realize, oh my God, that actually kind of works.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that, no money down. We often say, well, I don't have the $50,000 to start. Well, now we know about these virtual augmented reality headsets, things like Oculus. The initial one was created in Google's lab with a coat hanger, a piece of acetate, and a flashlight. And it actually proved the hypothesis they needed to prove to then actually put some capital in and develop what we now have. So that's the kind of scrappy stuff that we can learn in design thinking. Other questions from the audience? Over here to the left. And we'll repeat the question.
So this one talks about, this question I'm going to pull back into education this year. So we now in the state of West Virginia, in partnership with Administrator WVU and Marshall, have an entrepreneurship core courses that students take in 9 through 12. We're also embedding it within our career technical education courses so that the students learning the skills and trades not only have a skill when they walk out of high school, but then when they get into the workforce, they understand how to start their own business. So they're not looking for a business to go to outside of the state. They can stay here in the state and start their own one and build our economy. But my question about fear is, one thing that we talk to these teachers and these students about is learning to fail inside of the classroom and how to pivot from those failures. We use design thinking a lot through that program of study. But what I'm seeing happening is that the faculty and our community, that generation is being scared to let those students go there. So the students are not scared to step out, but then their parents may go, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? So how do we change that mindset of our state so that our younger generations who aren't fearful right now don't get swayed to become fearful?
That's a big one. And so the question is, what do you do about the middle layer? Essentially, now you've got a set of leaders who say this is the way to do it, and then you've got the kids who say we love it, and the resistance tends to come from parents and kind of the institutions in the middle. And this is actually a pervasive problem in education reform. And I've actually talked to people in education reform who say, actually, superintendents are on board with kind of modernizing, making more entrepreneurial education. Students love project-based learning, design thinking. The resistance tends to come from parents and institutions. And even teachers love it, but it's the systems that actually aren't responsive to them. That is teacher credentialing, student testing, the ways that the core curriculum is defined in a rigid way, the way that hours are counted to have butts in seats as opposed to being out there doing things in the world. Like, these are a lot of system level, that's a lot of system rigidity that actually is the institution fighting back against change. The way that I've seen it done is actually to essentially engage the community, the ecosystem, including the parents, the teachers, in a kind of a community design thinking process, where they all come along and see it together. Because if you ask parents and you say, what do you want your kids to have? What skills do you want them to have? They'll say grit, resilience, adaptivity. And then you say, like, great, all right, what do you want in the schools? They'll say, well, I want my kids to learn what I learned. And it's just, they don't fit, right? You actually need to take people through an entire thought process, and this is what design thinking does too, which is the light bulbs go on in their own heads, and they say, oh, aha, right? You can only force people to go so far. You need to take them to a point where their own light bulbs start going on, and that's where you actually have to pull people along and take them through that learning process, which is slow and not easy to do, for sure.
And I want to make sure, Tara, how are we doing on time? Are we till 9:30 or 9:15? Amber, how are we? Start wrapping it up. All right, well, I'm going to hit him with 2 power questions. I want to just wrap up with a thought to double down on what Victor said. We talked about this a lot in my prior life, and we talk about it here at Marshall, which is why we're trying to build the iCenter out so that the community can tap into design thinking, is shift our mindset from being a gymnast to being a baseball player. And the concept is this. In gymnastics, we know that those athletes go out and they compete, and every mistake they make, they get a point deducted. And so they're trying to be perfect. And my favorite phrase is the difference between excellence and perfection is excellence is a willingness to be caught learning. Perfection is a fear of making a mistake, which takes you to baseball. Does anybody know who the #1 hitter in the Hall of Fame is all time? Baseball? #1 hitter. Anybody know? Ted Williams. Anybody know what his batting average was? 407. Means he struck out 6 out of 10 times. He's the all-time greatest hitter. We've got to think more like that. More at-bats, more opportunities. Thomas Edison failed. He discovered the light bulb on attempt 10,006. The New York Times came up and interviewed him and said, how did it feel to fail 10,005 times? He said, son, I didn't fail 10,005 times. I proved 10,005 ways it wouldn't work. That's what we got to do, right? All right, 2 quick questions here, and then we'll wrap up. The first is, if anyone in this audience is thinking about starting a business, what is the single most important piece of advice you would give them?
Get out the door. This is the thing that happens to entrepreneurs or people that are thinking of starting a business of all kinds, which is they kind of get in their own heads and they start to think, well, this and that, and they start researching and thinking, and they start to, if you get too much in your own head when you're trying to start a business, it actually starts to work against you, because so much about starting a business is actually, well, what is out there? Like, what do people actually want and need? What are the problems? What would they actually pay for? What would they actually engage with? What do the suppliers actually provide? What does the community actually think about this kind of thing? And there was research done by Professor Ronnie Chatterjee at Duke, who actually found that most people actually drop there. They'll go out and they'll research their idea, they'll talk to some close friends about it, but they'll actually stop on reaching out to people who would know something about the thing they're trying to do, and actually talking to the people out there. And so get out the door and talk to people. And that's part of the design thinking process, it's part of the entrepreneurial process. And that is actually what most people are afraid to do because it's scary. And so that fear sets in of, well, I'll be laughed at, or I can't share this idea because I don't want to give it away. And really, ideas are easy, right? It's the doing of it that's really hard. And so getting out there and engaging with people, taking that step of overcoming that fear is super, super critical.
Ideas don't move mountains, bulldozers do. Let's get out the door. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Victor Wang.
All right, wow, what an incredible opening fireside chat. Let's just give another round of applause. So Tara mentioned this, but we do have a jam-packed back-to-back agenda the rest of the day. So we're gonna enter into 2 rounds of breakouts that are back-to-back. If you have the digital program, you can scan that QR code and see where to go. If you have the physical program, that will also tell you the rooms. They will be in halls 4, 7, 8, and 9, and we have tracks for entrepreneur and resource providers. So would encourage you to kind of go to the track that makes the most sense for you and learn and network with your peers in those sessions. So we will be back here at noon for lunch, so you'll go straight between the breakout sessions. A couple of other things that we want to make a note of is the Ecosystem Showcase. There are so many great resources in there. That's in the arena lobby, so you head through these doors, and we encourage you to visit those exhibitors. And we will have an individual doing professional headshots for folks that are available for free as part of our sponsorships. So we would encourage you to also get a professional headshot, and she will be in the arena lobby as well. With that, we'll set you to your breakouts. They should start at 9:30, and then the second round will start at 10:45. Thank you. Yes.